Good evening. This was a Christmas carol from Charles Dickens. Marley was dead. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge. Sometimes Marley. But he answered to both. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, retching, grasping, scraping, clutching, coveted old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. He carried his own low temperature always about. He iced his office in the dog days, didn't thaw at 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence upon Scrooge. No warmth could warm. No wintry weather chilled him. Nobody ever stopped him on the street to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. Why, even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and out courts. But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve, Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. The door to Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his rooms, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. A Merry Christmas, Uncle! It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly. It was the first intimation he had of his approach. A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you! Bah! Said Scrooge. Humbug! Christmas a humbug? Oh, you don't mean that, I'm sure. I do! Oh, don't be cross, Uncle. What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. And upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer. If I could work my will, every itchy who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly to his heart. Uncle! Nephew! Keep Christmas in your own way. Let me keep it in mine. Keep it? But you don't keep it. Dine with us tomorrow. Bah! I want nothing of you. I ask nothing from you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon. I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. But I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. And so, a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon! He left the room and stopped at the outer door to bestow the greeting of the season upon the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. There's another fellow, my clerk. 15 shilling a week, and wife and family talking about a Merry Christmas, huh? Are they tired to bedlam? The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 portly gentlemen in. Scrooge and Marley, I believe, huh? Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night. Oh, well, we have no doubt that his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is usually more than desirable that we should make some slight provisions for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir.
Are there no prisons?
Oh, yes, well, plenty of prisons.
And the union workhouses, are they still in operation?
Oh, still I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor then?
Oh, both very busy, sir.
Well, good. From what you said at first, I thought something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
Well, under the impression that they scarcely provide Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund, to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall we put you down for?
Nothing.
Oh, you wish to remain anonymous?
I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned, they cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
Well, many can't go there, and many would rather die.
Well, if they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon.
Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge returned to his labors with an improved opinion of himself. Meanwhile, the fog thickened so that the ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping slyly down at Scrooge out of its Gothic window in a wall, became invisible and struck the hours and quarters and the clouds with tremulous vibrations, as if its frozen teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. The owner of one scant young nose, gnawed by the hungry cold, as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day.
Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost. At length the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived.
With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool.
The clerk instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat.
You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose.
Well, if quite convenient, sir.
It's not convenient. And it's not fair. If I were to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used. Yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work.
Well, it's only once a year, sir.
Poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning.
The clerk promised he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his comforter dangling below his waist, went down a slide on Cornhill at the end of a lane of boys some 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as fast as he could pelt to play at blind man's bluff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying that it must have run there when it was a young house, playing at hide-and-seek with the other houses and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now, dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. Then any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, with his hand upon the key in the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not an impenetrable shadow as other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on his ghostly forehead. His hair was curiously stirred as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. As Scrooge stared fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled would be untrue, but he put his hand upon the key, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution, and he did look curiously behind the door, as if he half expected to see Marley's pigtails sticking out through the hole. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Bah!" and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded throughout the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellar below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door, walked across the hall and up the stairs, trimming his candle as he went, for it was dark. Scrooge not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy doors, he did look through the rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, nobody. Nobody under the table, nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus, secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown, nightcap, and slippers, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago and paved all round with quaint Dutch tile. But if each smooth tile had been blank at first, now there was a copy of old Marley's face on every one. Humbug! His glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in a room and communicated with some purpose now forgotten with the chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and a strange, inexplicable dread that as Scrooge looked at it, this bell began to swing. It swung so softly at the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in their house. Now this might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. Then the bells ceased as they had begun, together. They were succeeded by a loud clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar below. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses being described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound. Then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below. Then coming up the stairs. Then coming straight toward his door. It's humbug still! I won't believe it! His color changed, though, and without a pause it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leapt up, as though it cried, "I know him! Marley's ghost." The same, the very same Marley in his pigtails, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots. The tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail, his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he bore was bound around his middle. It was long and wound around him like a tail, and was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, heavy purses, wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing the waistcoat, could see the two buttons on the coat behind. Scrooge observed the phantom through and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound round his head and chin. "How now? What do you want with me?" "March!" Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." Who were you then?" "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." "Can you sit down?" "I can." "Do it then." Scrooge asked the question because he wasn't sure whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a seat. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me.
No, I don't.
You may be a slight disorder of the stomach. You might be a bit of undigested beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. Why, there's more gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook his chains with such dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on to his chair to save himself from falling into a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round his head and chin, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Dreadful apparition! Why do you trouble me?
Man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me or not?
Oh, I do. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they trouble me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow man and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the earth. Oh, woe is me! And witness what it cannot share, but might have shared and turned to happiness.
You are fettered, Jacob. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link, and yard by yard. I girded it of my own free will, and of my own free will I bore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you recognize the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as long and heavy as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain.
Scrooge glanced about in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of cable, but he could see nothing. Jacob! Kind Jacob Marley, speak comfort to me, Jacob!
I have none to give. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me in life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole. I never knew that any Christian spirit, working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Never knew that no space regret can make amends for one's life's opportunities misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business.
It held out its chain at arm's length as if that were the cause of all its unveiling grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again.
At this time of the rolling year, I suffer most. I am here to warn you that you have yet a hope and chance of escaping my fate. A hope and chance of my procuring, Ebenezer. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Without their visit, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the 3rd night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more. But look too for your own sake that you remember what has passed between us.
When it had said these words, the spectre took the bandage from the table and bound it round his head and chin as before. Scrooge knew this by the sharp sound its teeth made when the jaws were brought together. The spectre then walked backwards from him, and with each step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when he reached it, it was wide open. He beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of one another, Marley's ghost held up his hand, warning Scrooge to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped, not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear. For on the raising of the hand, he became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentations and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful undertones and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge hurried to the window, desperate in his curiosity. The air was filled with phantoms wandering hither and thither in desperate haste and moaning as they went. Each one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Many of them had been personally known to Scrooge during their lifetimes. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle, who cried piteously at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant whom it saw below upon a doorstep. The misery with all of them was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. And whether these phantoms faded into the mist or the mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. But they and their phantom voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. And being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or the brief glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. When Scrooge awoke, the chimes of a neighboring church had gone 3 quarters. So he listened for the hour.
12. Why, it was past 2 when I went to bed. 12. Why, it cannot be that I've slept through an entire day and far into another night. It cannot be that something has happened to the sun and that it is 12 at noon.
Scrooge thought and thought and thought it over and over and over again and could make nothing of it. He lay in his state until the chimes had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced that he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong, ding dong.
Quarter past.
Ding dong, ding dong.
Half past.
Ding dong, ding dong.
Quarter to it.
Ding dong, ding dong.
The hour itself. Oh, and nothing else.
He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which now it did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy dong. Lights flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. Not the curtains at his back, nor the curtains at his feet, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from view and being diminished into a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white, as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was in the skin. It wore a tunic of the purest white and held a branch of fresh green holly in his hand.
Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who? What are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past.
What business brought you here?
Your welfare.
Oh, well, I am much obliged, but a night of unbroken rest would be more conducive to that end.
Your reclamation, then. Take heed. It put out its strong hand and grasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes. He was clad but lightly in his dressing gown, nightcap, and slippers. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's touch, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. "Oh, I am mortal and liable to fall! Bear but a touch of my hand, and you will be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground. Good heavens! I was a boy here! You recollect the way? Oh, remembered. I could walk it blindfold. Strange to have forgotten it so many years. They walked along a road Scrooge recognized in every gate, post, and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some shaggy ponies were seen trotting toward them with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. These are but shadows of things that have been. They have no consciousness of us. The jocund travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named every one. He heard them give each other a Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads and byways for their several homes. The school is not completely deserted. A solitary child neglected by his friends is left there still. They walked along a high road by a well-remembered lane and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes. There was an earthly savor in the air, a chilly bareness in a place which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and not enough to eat. Scrooge and his spirit walked down a hall to a door which opened before them to disclose a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading by a feeble fire. Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. Oh, I wish. What? What is it? Asked the spirit. Oh, nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that is all. The spirit smiled. Let us see another Christmas. Scrooge's former self grew large with the words, and the room became a little darker, a little more dirty. The panels shrank, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell from the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how all this came about, Scrooge knew no more than do you. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened just so. But there he was alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge glanced anxiously at the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in and throwing her arms around him and kissing him, saying, Dear brother, I've come to bring you home, dear brother, to bring you home, home for good and all, home forever and ever. Our Father's so much kinder than he used to be that home is almost like heaven. He spoke so kindly to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him if you might come home. He said, yes, you should, and sent me in the coach to bring you, and you to be a man, and never to come back here. But first we're to be together all Christmas long, and have the merriest time in all the world. She began to drag him in her childish eagerness toward the door, and he, nothing loath to go, accompanied her. A delicate creature, said the spirit, whom a breath might have withered, but she had a large heart. Oh, true. You're right. Oh, not gainsay, spirit, God forbid. She died a woman, I believe, and had children. One child. True. Your nephew. Yes. They left the school and were soon in the busy thoroughfares of a city. The spirit stopped beside a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it? Was I apprentice here? An old man in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that had he been 2 inches taller, his head must have knocked the ceiling. Why, it's Fitzy.
It's old Fezziwig alive again!
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked to the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands and adjusted his capacious waistcoat and called out, "You hold there, Dick! Ebenezer!" Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice.
Why, it's Dick Wilkins, to be sure. No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Now let's have those shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson.
Well, you wouldn't believe how these two fellows ran at it. They ran into the streets with the shutters. 1, 2, 3, had them up and into their places. 4, 5, 6, barred them and pinned them. 7, 8, 9, and ran back before he could have gotten to 12, panting like racehorses. "Heely, hi-ho!" cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from the high desk with wonderful agility. "Clear away, lads. Let's have plenty of room here." The floor was swept and watered. The lamps were trimmed. Fuel was heaped upon the fire. And the warehouse was as bright and dry and snug and warm a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came the fiddler and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed by the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind a girl from next door but one who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another. Some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. There were dances, and there were forfeits, and there were more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies, and there was plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and the boiled, when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance, with Mrs. Fezziwig, top couple too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them, 3 or 4 and 20 pairs of partners. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times old Fezziwig would have been a match for them. And so would Mrs. Fezziwig. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations on either side of the door, and shaking hands with each person individually as he or she left, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everyone had left save the 2 apprentices, they did the same for them. Scrooge's former self turned down the lamps, and the cheerful voices died away. "A small matter," said the spirit, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. Why, he has but spent a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps." Oh, it isn't that, spirit, no, it isn't that. Why, he has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Oh, why, the happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. My time grows short, quick. Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in his eyes, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears. "Another idol has displaced me. And if it can cheer and comfort you in years to come, as I would have tried to do, then I have no just cause to grieve." Why, what idol has displaced you? "A golden one."
Oh, this is the even-handed dealings of the world. There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing which it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth.
Oh, you fear the world too much. I have watched as your nobler aspirations have fallen off one by one, until the master passion gain engrosses you. Have I not?
Well, what then? What then? Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed toward you.
Oh, you are changed. If you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl?
release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. May you be happy in the life you have chosen. And so she left him, and they parted.
Spirit, conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me?
I have told you that these are but shadows of things that have been. That they are what they are, do not blame me.
Leave me. Conduct me home. Haunt me no longer. I cannot stand it.
He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further of being in his own room. He had barely time to reel back to bed before he sunk into a heavy sleep. Awakening in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he had been restored to consciousness in the right nick of time for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new spectre would draw aside, he put them, everyone, aside with his own hands, and lying down again established a sharp lookout all round the room. For he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and be made nervous. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. And consequently, when the bell sounded and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. All this while he lay in bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon him when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant. At last he began to sense that the source and secret of this ghostly light lay in the adjoining room, from whence on further tracing it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly in his slippers and shuffled to the door. It was his own room, there was no doubt about it, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove. In easy state upon the couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up that it might shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the corner. Come in and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me! The ghost was clothed in one simple green robe, bordered round with white fur. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds, were bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Come in! You have never seen the like of me before?
Oh, no, never.
Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family?
Oh, I don't think so, Spirit. Have you many brothers, Spirit?
More than 1,800.
Oh, well, a tremendous family to provide for.
The ghost of Christmas present rose. Touch my robe. Scrooge did as he was told. All vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of night. And they stood upon a city street on Christmas Day. Soon the steeples called all good people to church and chapel, and out they flocked, hurrying to and fro, in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. Scrooge and the spirit walked on, invisible, and straight to Scrooge's clerk, Bob Cratchit's house. Mrs. Cratchit, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes and getting the corners of his monstrous collar, Bob's private property, into his mouth. And now the two young Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own. And basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these two young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies as he blew the fire till the slow potatoes bubbling up knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. "What has ever gotten into your precious father, then?" said Mrs. Cratchit. "And your brother, Tiny Tim, and Martha, latest last Christmas Day by half an hour." "There's Martha, Mother!" cried the two young Cratchits. "Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha!" "Well, bless your heart alive, how late you are, my dear," said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her bonnet and shawl for her with officious zeal. "Well, never you mind, as long as you come. Now set you down before the fire and have a warm, Lord bless you." Now, there's Father coming," cried the two young Cratchits who were everywhere at once. "Hi, Martha, hi." So Martha hid herself, and in came Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe dangling below his waist, and his threadbare clothes darned and brushed up to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" cried Bob, looking round. "Oh, well, not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming? Not coming upon Christmas Day?" Well, Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, even if it only were in jest, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms. As the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. "And how did our little Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit. "Oh, good as gold and better," said Bob. "He gets so thoughtful sitting by himself so much and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. Why, he told me coming home today that he hoped that people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and that it might be pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who made the lame beggars walk and the blind men see. Oh, he's growing strong and hearty." His little crush was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his little stool by the chimney corner, while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made any more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons and stirred it round and round and put it on the hob to simmer. Master Peter and the two ubiquitous Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon, to which a black swan was a matter of course. And in truth, there was something very much like that in that house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy ready beforehand, hissing hot in a little saucepan. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. And the two young Cratchits set chairs for everyone, not forgetting themselves. And mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before the turn came to be helped. And now the dishes being set, and grace being said, it was succeeded by a long, breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. Oh, but when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight rose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe such a goose was ever cooked. Its tenderness, flavor, size, and cheapness were themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a dinner sufficient for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said, surveying one small atom of a bone upon a dish, that, well, they haven't had it all at last. Yet everyone had had their fill. And the two young Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrow. And now the dishes being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room, alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take up the pudding and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break and turn it out. Suppose someone should have gotten over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were making merry with the goose. Ah, the supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, blushed, but smiling proudly, with a pudding like a speckled cannonball, so round and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly in the top. A wonderful pudding. Bob said he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now that the weight was off her mind, she'd confess that she had a doubt about the quantity of flour. Everyone had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. And now, dinner being done, the cloth cleared, the hearth swept, the compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect. Apples and oranges were set upon the table, a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then the whole Cratchit family drew around the hearth in what Bob called a circle, meaning half a one. And to Bob's elbow stood a family display of glass. 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. But these held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done. And Bob poured it out with beaming looks as the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed a toast. Merry Christmas, my dears. God bless us.
God bless us. Everyone,
said Tiny Tim, who sat very close to his father, who held his withered little hand in his. Spirit, said Scrooge, tell me if Tiny Tim will live. I see an empty seat by a chimney corner, and crutch with Ononona carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered, the child will die.
oh no.
Oh no, kind spirit, say he will be spared. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. But then, if he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted to him by the Spirit. Man, if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is, and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live? What men shall die? Why, it may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Scrooge bent before the ghostly rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground. But he raised them speedily upon hearing his name. Mr. Scrooge, said Bob, I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
Oh, the founder of the feast indeed, cried Mrs. Cratchit. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope he'd have a good appetite for it too.
My dear, Christmas Day.
Ah, well, it should be Christmas Day on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. Why, you know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow.
My dear, children, Christmas Day. Well,
I'll drink his health for your sake and for the days, but not for his. Long life to him, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
the children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank a glass of all, but he didn't care a tuppence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. After it had passed, they were 10 times the merrier from the mere relief of Scrooge the baleful being done with. The chestnuts in the jug went round and round, and by they had a little song about a lost child traveling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice, and sang it very well indeed. There was nothing of high marks in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from waterproof. Their clothes were scanty. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded and looked happier yet in a bright sprinkling of the Spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim until the last. And now, without a word of warning from the spirit, they stood upon a desert moor.
What place is this? Asked Scrooge.
A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth. But they know me. See? A light shone from a window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced toward it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company gathered round a glowing fire. An old man and woman, with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge hold his robe, and passing on above the moor, sped out to sea. On and on above the black and heaving sea. On and on, until being far from any shore, they lighted on a ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout at the bow, the officers who had the watch, dark, ghostly figures in their several stations. But each man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke beneath his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, though, while listening to the moaning wind, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to recognize it as his nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the spirit standing by his side, looking at the same nephew and smiling with approving affability. Well, he said Christmas was a humbug. As I live, he believed it too.
Ah, well, more the shame for him, Fred,
said Scrooge's niece. Oh, I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Why, who suffers by his ill whims? He himself always.
Here he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't dine with us. And what's the consequence? That he loses some pleasant moments which could do him no harm. He loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his mouldy old office or his dusty chambers.
No, I mean to give him the same opportunity every year, whether he likes it or not. The whole scene faded in the breath of the last words spoken by the nephew, and Scrooge and the spirit were again upon their travels. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were comforted. On foreign lands, and they were close to home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. By poverty, and it was rich. In almhouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man in his brief little authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. Scrooge, observing the spirit as they stood in an open place, noticed that his hair was grey. Must have been its life so short? My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight at midnight. Hark, the time is drawing near. The chimes of a neighboring church had gone 3 quarters at that moment.
Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask, but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot? Or a claw?
It might as well be a claw for all the flesh there is upon it. Look here! From the foldings of its robe it brought out 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, miserable, hideous. They fell to their knees and clung to the outside of his garment.
Spirit! Are they yours?
They are man's. Beware them. Beware them both, but most of all beware this boy, for I see that written upon his brow, which is doom, unless the writing be erased. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Deny it. Slander those who tell it to you. Admit it for your factious purposes and make it worse, and abide the end.
But have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? The clock struck 12. Lifting up his eyes, Scrooge beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him. Slowly, gravely, silently. The very air through which this phantom moved seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come.
The spirit answered not, but pointed downward with his hand.
You are about to show me shadows of things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us. Lead on, spirit. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to be now. Lead on.
They scarcely seemed to enter a city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them and encompass them of its own act. The spirit stopped beside a little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed toward them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "Well, I don't know much about it at all. I only know that he's dead, that's all." "Why, when did he die?"
I thought he'd never die.
What has he done with his money?
"Oh, I don't know. Left it to his company, perhaps. Hasn't left it to me. That's all I know."
Well, it's likely to be a very cheap funeral, for upon my life, I don't know anyone that'll go to it.
Well, I don't mind going, provided that lunch is served.
"But I must be fed." "Well, goodbye."
Goodbye.
Goodbye. They left the scene and went to an obscure part of town. The ways were foul and narrow, the people half-naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. The whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Far into this den of infamous resort there was a low-browed beetling shop beneath a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bones, bottles, greasy offal were bought. Sitting among the wares he dealt in by a charcoal stove made of old brick was a grey-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who smoked his pipe in all luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But no sooner than she entered than another woman similarly laden came in too, and she followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled at the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of one another.
Now look here, Joe, cried she who entered first. If we all had met here without meaning to.
Well, you couldn't have met in a better place. Come into the parlour.
The woman who had spoken first threw a bundle on the floor.
Well, every person has a right to take care of themselves, he always did. And who's the worse for a loss of a few items like this? Not a dead man, I'd say. Open up that bundle, Joe, and let me know the value of it.
Ah, but the gallantry of her friends would not allow of this, and a man in faded black, mounting the breach first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, an old brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and brought them to a total when he found there was nothing more to come. The other woman was next, sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner.
And now, undo my bundle, Joe!
Well, old Joe got down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, drew out a long and heavy roll of some dark stuff.
Why, what do you call it?
Bed curtains? You don't mean to say you took them down? Rings and all with him lying there now, do you? Oh, and don't you get any oil on them blankets now, Joe?
What?
His blankets? Oh, and whose else do you think they are, huh? Isn't likely to catch cold without them, I dare say.
Well, I hope he didn't die of anything catching.
Oh, don't you worry about that. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such a thing if he did. Oh, and you can look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it nor a threadbare place. Why, it's the best he had, and a fine one too. And they'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me.
Boy.
What do you call wasting it?
Well, putting it on him to be buried in for sure. Someone was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. He viewed them with a detestation and a disgust which could hardly have been greater had they been demons marketing the corpse itself. And now the scene changed, and he almost touched a bed. A bare, uncurtained bed, upon which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself with awful language. There upon the bed, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, lay the body of this man, Scrooge glanced to the spirit. Its steady hand was pointed downward to the face. The sheet was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the merest motion of a finger on Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. Spirit, I understand you. I understand you, and I would do it if I could. But I have not the power. Oh, Spirit, I have not the power. Oh, Spirit, if there is any person in town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show that person to me, Spirit. Oh, I beseech you. The phantom spread his robe like a wing, and removing it revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She hurried to the door to meet her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was quite young. There was a remarkable expression on it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed and which he tried to repress. Is it good or bad? She asked. Bad. Oh. Well, then we're quite ruined. No, there's hope yet. Hope. Hope. If he relents. Oh, he's past relenting. He's dead. Oh, she was thankful in her heart to hear it. Oh, she prayed forgiveness the next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. Well, to who then will our debt be transferred? Oh, I don't know. But by that time we shall be ready with the money. Oh, we may sleep tonight with light hearts. Yes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter, and it was a happier house for this man's death. Spirit! Show me some tenderness connected with this death, or that dark chamber which we left just now will forever be present to me. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him through the streets, and they entered poor Bob Cratchit's house. Quiet, very, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely, they were very, very quiet. Mrs. Cratchit laid her work upon the table and put her hand to her head. Oh, the color hurts my eyes and makes them weak by candlelight. And I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for all the world. Oh, must be near his time now. But I think he's walked a little slower than he used these few last evenings. Oh, I have known him to walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed. Oh, but he was so light to carry. And your father loved him so that it was no trouble. No trouble. Oh, and there's your father now at the door. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits climbed upon each knee and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, Father. Don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful and spoke pleasantly to the whole family. Then Mrs. Cratchit said, "You went then today, Robert?" "Oh, yes, my dear. Oh, I wish you could have gone. It'd do your heart good to see how green a place it is. But you'll go soon, for I promised him that we would take a walk there on a Sunday." My little child. My little child. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, then he and his little child would have been further apart, perhaps, than they were. He left the room and went upstairs to a room above. It was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the body of the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Bob sat down, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened, and he went downstairs again. The family drew around the fire and talked. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely met but once, and who, seeing him in the street that day and thinking that he looked a little, well, just a little down, you know, inquired what had happened to distress him. On which, said Bob, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you ever heard. I told him, I am hardly sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, he says to me. And hardly sorry for your good wife, too. It seemed as if he had known our little Tim and felt with us. But however and whenever we part from one another, my dears, I'm sure that we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim in this first parting that was among us. No, Father, never, cried they all. And I know that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was just a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves and forget poor Tiny Tim in 2 minutes. No, Father, never, cried they all again. I am happy. I am very, very happy. Spirit, something informs me that our parting moment is close at hand. Tell me who that man was we saw lying dead upon the bed. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him as before to a churchyard. And here the wretched man whose name he was to learn lay beneath the ground. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed downward with his hand. Scrooge advanced toward it trembling. Before I draw near to this stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be? Or are they shadows of things that may be only? Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which it persevered and they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me. The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge advanced toward it, trembling as he went, and following the hand, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I the man who lay upon the bed? The spirit pointed from the stone to him and back again. Oh no, no, spirit! I am not the man I was! Why show me all this if I have passed all hope? Oh, good spirit, assure me that I may yet change these shadows that you have shown me by an altered life. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirit of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may smudge away the writing on this stone. Holding up his hand to the last prayer, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. And the bedpost was his own. The bed curtains were his own. They are not torn down. I'm here! I'm here! Oh, the shadows of things that may be will be dispelled. Oh, I know they will. Oh, I don't know what to do. Oh, I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. Merry Christmas to everyone, and a Happy New Year to all the world. I don't know how long I've been with the spirit. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Running to the window, he opened it, and calling to a boy in Sunday clothes, "What's today? Eh? Today? What's today, my fine fellow? Today? Why, it's Christmas Day." It's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. It's Christmas
Christmas Day! I haven't missed it! Oh, the spirits have done it all in one night! Oh, they can do anything they like. Oh, of course they can. Of course they can. Do you know the poulterer's on the next street but one? At the corner. Well, I should hope I did. An intelligent boy, huh? A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging in the window? What? The one as big as me? Delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my boy. Well, it's hanging there still. Is it? We're going by it. Yes, tell the man to bring it here. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown.
The boy was off like a shot.
I shall send it to Bob Cratchit. Oh, he shall know who sent it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
He went downstairs, opened the door ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. And as he stood there, the knocker caught his eye.
I shall love it as long as I live. I scarcely ever noticed it before. What a noble expression it has on its face. Why, it's really a wonderful knocker. Oh, there you are! Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!
Well, that turkey is too big to carry to Camden Town, huh? You must have a cab!
Well, the chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again, and chuckled until he cried. At last he got himself all dressed in his Sunday best, and walking in the streets with his hands behind his back, he looked so irresistibly pleasant that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir! Merry Christmas to you!" Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest to his ears. He had not gone far when he beheld coming toward him the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting house the day before. It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old fellow would look upon him when they met. But he knew the path that lay before him, and he took it. "My dear sir?" "Mr. Scrooge?"
Yes, that is my name. And I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon. And will you have the kindness to..."
Here Scrooge whispered into his ear,
My dear sir, are you serious?
Oh, if you please, and not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favor?
Well, I don't know what to say.
Oh, well, don't say anything. Just come and see me. Will you come and see me?
Well, I will.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you.
He went to church. He walked along the street and watched the people hurrying to and fro. He patted children on the head. He questioned beggars. And he found that everything could yield him pleasure. In the afternoon, he turned his steps toward his nephews. He walked past the door a dozen times before the nerve to go up and knock, but he made a dash and he did it.
Fred!
Lord bless me. Who's that?
Oh, it is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in?
Let him in. It was a miracle he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could have been heartier. Wonderful games, wonderful friends, wonderful party, wonderful unanimity. Wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If only he could be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That's what he'd set his heart upon. And he did it. Oh, yes, he did. Clock struck 9. No Bob. Quarter past. No Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with the door wide open that he might see Cratchit coming in. Suddenly he was there, his hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too, and he was at his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen, as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
What do you mean by coming in here this time of day?
Oh, I'm very sorry, sir. It will not happen again. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now I'll tell you what. I am not about to stand for this sort of thing any longer, Bob Cratchit. And therefore I am about to raise your salary!
A Merry Christmas, Bob! Oh, many a Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, that I have given you for many a year. I will raise your salary and endeavor to assist your family. And we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop.
Well, now, make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I. Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he became a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that truly be said of us, and of all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,